Excited. Today, we're going to be hearing from Nathan Staub, managing partner of Calvin Edwards and Company. For more than 2 decades, Calvin Edwards and Company has provided investment grade research, guidance, and also support for high net worth donors. These clients are oftentimes people of faith who have been blessed financially and they're motivated by their faith and want to give back. And so, what Nathan's team does is they help these high net worth donors make decisions. They research nonprofits and funding strategies, business plans, and they advise their clients about how to make impactful donations. Calvin Edwards clients, they give not only domestically here in the US, but also internationally. And Nathan has worked in a variety of contexts around the globe. Almost all of our ministries require us to raise funds to support our efforts. And today, we're going to explore how to work with donors, what to avoid, and some of the most common mistakes that Nathan has seen nonprofit leaders make. So to get things started, I'll just say, welcome, Nathan. We look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Thad. Yeah, I still have a job offer out to Thad to tell other people what we do better than I can. So grateful for that introduction. I think what we'll do here is I'll do a brief introduction of who I am. At the end, I'll try to give us a short prompting for our breakout discussion. We'll have that, then we'll have kind of a second stage of the positive things that I've seen in our space and where it's going, and then have a breakout session, and then the third leg will be some of the difficulties of our space and how we've seen ministries and nonprofits effectively manage that. Before I start, with y'all's permission and blessing, I want to pray for our time together and offer it that it'd be useful for you all. My wisdom is limited, but we serve a God whose wisdom is not. So, God, thank you for this group of people. Thank you for Thad and the common table bringing us together. I pray that you would use the experience that you've given me to serve the people in this room so that they can go out and serve shepherds of your flock. In Jesus' name, amen. As Thad mentioned, Calvin Edwards and Company, I've run it for the past 2 or 3 years. The time kind of runs together. There's a guy named Calvin Edwards who started the firm. I took over in 2021. We are now part of a larger company called Blue Trust, which is a wealth advisory firm. We've been independent for 22 years and had grown to the point where we were ready for some scale if God was in it. So we joined up with them who had been a long-term partner and have continued to grow, and God has brought some fun things along the way. We describe ourselves as a research firm. I think most people from the outside would call us philanthropic consultants. Our heart is research, evaluation, analysis of nonprofits, due diligence on behalf of large, significant donors and foundations. So folks hire us to understand what they're giving towards. Along the way, I tend to describe our business in 3 areas. We do program evaluation, which is, I'm sure y'all are familiar, outputs and outcomes. And not only is this program efficient, but is it effective? Is it making the change in the lives of the people that they're serving as they think they're doing? So going out in the field all over the world and surveying and trying to get an understanding for that on behalf of donors, typically, sometimes on behalf of an organization in order to communicate to donors. So that's a part of who we are. It's the part we care about the most, but obviously very in-depth and painstaking sometimes. So not the largest part of what we do. Probably 30 or 40% of our work is working for donors on donors, right? So the object of our work is no longer the nonprofit, but it's turning the spotlight back onto the donor, and how can we set up system structure, staffing, processes in order to optimize a giving entity so that it can find good nonprofits and maximize the good of giving, which is our motto. Certainly believe that all giving is good. It's what God called us to do, but the good that can be accomplished in the world can be maximized. So that's what we try to help clients do. We're a small shop. I got 8 folks working for me, including Calvin, which has been great. If anybody here is going through a leadership transition, I'd love to talk to you on the side. It's a passion of mine, and Calvin has been excellent in that process and really elevated me. So I'm grateful for that. We have typically 8 to 12. I think right now we have 15, but we're trying to beat that number back down a little bit. But 8 to 12 clients at any one time, giving between $5 and $50 million away a year. So a very narrow slice of what would be the giving community. Take what I say with that kind of context. It's speaking for a fairly narrow band. I'll try to expand a bit of the insights outside of that, but to be frank, that's where I spend all of my day. So that's the experience I'm stepping out of. I was talking to Paul, Candace, and Michael in our breakout session, who are lovely people, and describing what happens when we're called in, right? So folks are giving. They don't really need us to give. They know the Bible tells them to do that. And there's people in their church that come up to them all the time, know they're successful business people or come from a place of means, and they get lots of requests. And so all of our clients are givers. There's great organizations like Generous Giving and others who encourage that. Bibles and the Bible and pastors and hopefully wealth advisors are encouraging that. Certainly the folks over at Blue Trust who are a part of that's the key to their mission, releasing resources to fulfill the Great Commission is the Blue Trust mission. So we don't do that. We come alongside people who are already generous. So what happens is they have a baseline of relational giving, and sometimes that's $100,000. Sometimes that's we had one client who was doing $800,000 in missionary support. It's like incredible to people he knew. Oftentimes it's not quite that high, and it's typically under $250,000 that they feel like they can steward the money well to the people they know at that level, right? Anymore, dropping a couple $100,000 on the local crew ministry at the college probably isn't wise, right? So they're giving to the people that God puts them in the path, and then they have more to give. And when you don't have relationship to rely on, and you don't have time to build more relationships, what bridges that gap? What creates that trust that enables these business folks to make large investments in ministries? And the answer to that for us, and other people approach it differently, but for us is information and research. So we bridge that trust gap through information. I was just with a client yesterday or the day before, and they're one of the largest givers to Christian causes in America, maybe the largest. And we were talking about, they're giving away grants of about, in this case, about $500,000. And the decision makers didn't really have that relational equity, right? And what we did is we brought information, objective, business styled, business presented information. And he said, what y'all did is y'all built a bridge that created trust that allowed us to be comfortable in this investment, when typically our giving has been strictly siloed to people we knew and could call up on, on the phone and chat with. So that's what we do. I'm not sure how that aligns with a lot of the work that y'all are doing in your fundraising conversations, but we're typically working with those folks who may not be able to have that deep relationship that I know everybody on the fundraising side would love to have, but they're I'm typically fairly busy and don't have the capacity for that. So with that's who we are. I came from that small investment firm. I grew up on a children's home that my dad started, and he would help other folks start children's homes, and we would talk about there was not a strong correlation between the ability to raise money and the effectiveness of a nonprofit, right? If you had 3 great stories from 15 years ago and you were a charismatic speaker, you could raise a whole lot of money. And if you were an incredible servant who was really good in the field, but maybe wasn't quite as comfortable talking about your work, you really struggled to raise money. And so that correlation was not very strong. And coming from that world, I thought, man, I would love to see if I could kind of design a job, thought I'd love to be in between and help donors find folks who are highly effective, who may or may not be good at talking about it. And annoyed enough people over 6 months and said, hey, you're talking kind of funny, but it's the same kind of funny as this guy named Calvin Edwards. So I met Calvin, and the rest is history. So with that, Thad, I think that's about the background for us. If you want to send us into that first time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be going out into breakout groups as we're just getting oriented here. And what I'd like for you to discuss is positive or negative. What's been your experience building relationships with donors? So positive or negative? What's been your relationship, building relationships with donors? All right. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some good conversations. I know we come from a variety of perspectives, and so it's always helpful to have an opportunity just to kind of circle up and hear about each other's ministries and the ways that we're building relationships along the way. So in Nathan's presentations, he's going to offer you in this next section some things about the positive, things to emulate. So we're really excited about hearing from you, Nathan, and so I'll turn things back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Thad. Well, reflecting off of our breakout conversation, I'm glad my first bullet is holding true. What I wanted to chat with y'all. Most giving happens relationally, and most life-giving donations, donations that bring about joy, donations that are beneficial for the ministry, both from a volunteer perspective, from a board member perspective, those happen mostly in relationships. So a lot of what I'll talk about is the things outside of relationships that you all may consider as you seek to build out your fundraising operation and the way that you talk about yourselves. But I wanted to first start out and encourage you all that building the relationships, building trust, caring for the people that are giving to you beyond just what they can give to you, as I'm sure most of you do just naturally, that's the best fundraising. It's kind of like Paul in our group comes from sales, and it's amazing when we're obedient to God and the way that we treat people, it tends to be pretty good for the results of whatever we happen to be doing, right? And I think that holds true in sales when you genuinely care about the people you happen to be talking to, even though the reason you're talking to them is to sell them something. If you care about that human, that comes across. And it's the same thing with fundraising. I have a lot of clients who feel very used by ministry people, very transactional. And I have some clients whose best friends try to raise money from them and fail. So I would just say that investment in relationship and walking with people, to the extent that they have capacity or desire for that, is what we're called to do. And I'd encourage y'all to continue that. So that's number one. It's not really what we do. Like I said, we try to bridge trust gaps with information. So along with stories of impact, we're story people. So along with those 3 great stories, maybe from 15 years ago, we really work with donors and with some nonprofits to help them tell their story through numbers and try to bring rigor and analytical thinking to show what's happening with the dollars. There's a big disconnect between how Christian ministries typically view themselves and how a business-minded donor would view themselves or would view them. The way the business person thinks about it is they say, listen, this is an investment. Every day I have people coming to me. They have great stories. They have worthy missions. They have great websites and videos and good-looking annual reports. But I have limited resources, and it's incumbent upon me. God has entrusted me with the stewardship of these dollars. So when you think about a ministry donation as an investment, it becomes clear how you need to talk to people, right? Every investment has a risk. So we were talking to our client on Tuesday. It's nice. I was telling Thad I had 2 all-day meetings, one on Tuesday and one on Wednesday with our biggest client. So I got fresh stories. But our meeting on Tuesday, we produce an 8-page, what's called a nonprofit exam. And on the back page is a risks assessment, right? And in any investment, a business person knows there's risk inherent in it, right? The risk reward. There's always risk inherent in an investment, and especially a big investment, which clients or ministries are asking of my clients. So what we do is we come from a third-party objective perspective and say, hey, here are the risks, right? If it has a small board that has the founder and 3 of his friends that have been on there for 20 years, that's a risk. Or maybe it's him and his wife and his father-in-law, right? That creates a risk. It doesn't mean you shouldn't donate to them, but it's a risk, right? If they have annual expenses of $300,000 and are asking you for $250,000, that's a risk, right? So we'll talk about that. If this is for a new project that has kind of what we would consider a weaker assessment of the degree of demand for the services, right? It can sound really good, but are people going to want to use this? Will people show up? The most pertinent example is I was at the opening gala of the Faith and Liberty exhibit up in museum up in Philadelphia a couple years ago. So ABS's, American Bible Society's initiative to help people engage with the Bible. It's well over $100 million and closed after about 2 or 3 years, right? So there was a risk inherent in that investment, and we didn't get hired to do research, but if we had, we would have disclosed that risk, and then our client would have thought about whether or not they wanted to jump in on that risk. So as I think from y'all's perspective and how you communicate to donors, there's stories, there's a whole lot that God is doing that we'll never be able to measure. But then the things that we can measure, how do we communicate those in a clear, concise way, just like a business would? Risk assessment's important. I'm sure that you all have logic models and log frames and have developed that or may have developed that for your organizations. The way that we coach business people through that is we talk about efficiency and effectiveness, right? Efficiency is how many dollars they put in for the outputs that they create, right? And when you think about that, if you're doing deep work, right, sometimes a lot of that deep work, there's not the output numbers aren't that big, right? It feels like a lot of money to touch relatively few lives, or it may feel like that from some perspective. So what you're doing is you're saying, hey, here's the outputs, here's the efficiency. Now let's talk about the effectiveness. What we love to see is when people have program evaluation systems where they're able to gauge their effectiveness through surveys and statistical data. That's not always possible. I was talking with a guy the other day. He used to work at the McClellan Foundation, a guy named Cole Costanza, I believe. And he was talking about a lever. And business folks say, hey, we want a highly leveraged gift. We want to train leaders who then train people. And right, the $1 creates impact in 10 lives. But the further up you get away from the fulcrum, right, if this is a lever and this is a fulcrum, the further away you get, the harder it is to measure because you're further away from the impact, right? So some of you may have highly leveraged missions. So it's very hard for you to go all the way down there and track, okay, what changes in people's lives are we creating with these dollars? So when that can't happen or in correlation with that happen, we try to encourage folks to think about a theory of change. And theory of change is a often abused word that has lots of different definitions. So let me define it in the way that we think about it. And if you don't agree with that definition, take what I say and put a different name on it. But the way that we think about theory of change is the assumptions you have about the world that have led you to your chosen strategy, right? So you have a mission, and to accomplish that mission, you could have chosen many different strategies. And what you believe about the world has, a series of beliefs has led you to a specific strategy. Hopefully, some of those beliefs are backed by scientific research. But if you can walk donors either orally or through a couple page written statement of here's what we're trying to do, you agree with that, you're talking to us, so you believe in our mission, and we're going to walk you through why we have chosen our strategy. It's a very intellectual exercise, but it can be really beneficial to help these donors understand the methodology and the reason and some of your expertise. So think about what are alternative strategies that we could have taken, and how do we express those strategies and the reason we chose ours as an assumption that we believe about the world, and hopefully that donor shares. So those are a couple investment, a couple ways to talk about your ministry that are highly analytical and that we have found really connect with business-minded donors, especially those donors who may not have that relationship. Oftentimes the folks who hire us to do our work, we might as well not do our work. They're going to give to the nonprofit regardless, right? But they want something to take to their other friends and say, listen, don't believe me, read this, right? Read this that you've never read before, that this is a business analysis of this ministry, because you're never going to have the relationship I have with this ministry. But here's information presented in a way that you can understand that says, this is what this ministry wants to do, and this is how they're doing it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathan. And so just to kind of summarize from the positive side of things that Nathan's been talking about, one, relationships really matter. People don't give to organizations, people give to people. Relationships really matter. Insofar as relationships matter, though, think about ways that you can talk about your ministry like an investment. So if you're dealing with high net worth donors, they come from a business perspective. How would you think about communicating your organization's work like that of an investment? And you can do that in a couple of ways. One is by telling stories like what Nathan said, and the other is by providing data. So as you go out into your breakouts, one of the things we want you to kind of focus on then is, how does your organization employ both stories and data to communicate its work? And what questions are hard for you to answer? So how does your organization employ both stories and data to communicate its work? So we've talked about some of the positive things that we hope you will emulate, including building relationships, building upon data, and telling stories, thinking about your organization as an investment. Now we're going to turn towards the things you want to avoid. So Nathan, tell us what we should not be doing.
Yeah, thanks, Stan. I think it's interesting having these conversations with our clients. I think I mentioned it before. Not all of our clients are Christians, but most of them are. And they view their money, what we would call their money, is not their money, right? That it's God's money. But they do view, just like when they're investing their money, they view the investment of where they give seriously and the impact that that investment creates. And many of them have been burned. Sometimes that burning looks like moral failure on the behalf of the leader. We did deep work on RZIM back in 2006 that and we all, I think most of us know the story there with Ravi. There's burning that way, and then there's also burning with the feeling that, hey, is what we're doing really making an impact? And I would encourage y'all, in the polite society we have in America, when you lose a donor, and it's a highly relational interaction, and then they go away. When I hear that story from the other side, it's often questions that they should ask you but aren't comfortable asking you. And that's around effectiveness. That's around the impact that they're having statistically. They know that there's great stories, but they wonder in the back of their mind, hey, there's a lot of cars in the parking lot, and I wonder how much is getting done. And so what we've found is the groups that have both, the groups that answer the question that the donor has in the back of their mind before they even ask it, have that donor retention, and the groups that don't often don't realize they need to do it because the donor never tells them the real reason that I stopped giving to you is because I don't know if what you're doing helps, right? But they're not going to say that to y'all. So what I would encourage you all to do is to proactively give them that information, proactively tell them about the other strategies that they may encounter and why you're doing your chosen strategy, right? Anticipate reasons that investment that they would think that, hey, maybe they can make that investment somewhere else, and make your argument for the investment in your ministry. So the other thing, and this is kind of I appreciate Thad giving me this platform to say the problems. And so I'll just do one and encourage you in this. There's something called ministry language. We say it over here. And when I tell people what I do, which is often just provide information, they kind of look at me like, and you get paid to do that? Like, ministries are already giving donors information. What do you have to do? You just repeat what they say and you're just a hallway? I have never read maybe 5%, maybe 10% of a strategy of a ministry that's in actual clear articulation of how they're accomplishing their mission. Ministries really struggle to use commonly understood language, and because we're in our own ecosystem, like we all are, and ministries often talk to other ministries, and ministry people often talk to other ministry people, there's a blindness to the fact that these words that we use often aren't understood by our reader, right? It's kind of writing 101, understanding your audience. So I'll give you a few examples. One of the recent projects that we've been engaged to do is to examine our clients' investment in what has been called trauma healing. So trauma healing and is a fundraising buzzword. It's also happens to be a really important work, but is a fundraising buzzword. Same thing for capacity building is the new fad. Leadership training is a little bit out of vogue, but about 5 years ago was a really big deal. And so what happens is these, fundraising groups tend to start using the same words that we know that are attracting funders, and donors are responsible for it too, right? A foundation will say, we want to fund trauma healing. So then what happens? Our client is giving to 50 or 60 projects that all have a trauma healing component on it. And the definition of what trauma healing means is resources that are downloaded from a website that counts as one person served with trauma healing services, to 18-month residential programs in countries near the Middle East, where they take folks out and try to heal them with professional services. Now, could all of those be good things? Yes. As an ecosystem of charities, are we doing donors a disservice by calling everything the same thing? Absolutely. Words like trafficking is another one. What do we mean by trafficking? What proportion of your funding is going towards fighting trafficking versus everything else that you're doing that may be really good but isn't trafficking? Partners, what do you mean by partners? You call donors partners, you call the people who are doing the work in the field partners, you call people that you're collaborating with partners. Using precise language in the way that you communicate to donors, the way that you talk about yourselves seems small, but it's a gift to folks who are coming from the outside and trying to understand what you do. And it helps you communicate your mission more clearly. This group that we work with, they give away about $40 million a year to 200 nonprofits and about 300 to 400 projects, right? And again, we get called in to define terms for them because ministries do not communicate about themselves concretely. And when they try to talk about, hey, what is the impact we're having, when that insider language is used, they're at a real disadvantage to know how the impact. The last thing I'll say, and this is admittedly much more narrow than the rest of my talk. If you are interested in receiving funding from folks who are giving away a lot of money, you need big ideas. You need 2-page, very clearly articulated, big ideas that's going to absorb significant funding. Most of my work, if an organization can absorb over $100,000, they get cut. Like, that's the first cut. Hey, because it's the easiest, right? The dollar number is the easiest to cut on. So I would say if you're not part of a large organization and you're looking to play in this pool, create partnerships with large organizations that can join with you and be a sponsoring entity that can provide that comfort and de-risk the investment for someone. But don't be afraid to dream big. Don't be afraid to have big swings, and always have something in your back pocket if you're having conversations with these folks, because as soon as you say things like $20,000 or $30,000, they tend to get excited about bigger things. So if you have something that's really compelling, that's big, have an assessment, kind of look at yourself saying, are we able as an organization to present ourselves in a way that would bring confidence to a donor, or do we need to join with another group? Regent University, and I don't know how we are in time. Regent University, there's a guy named Jim Sells over there. They've received a significant amount of funding to help take an app that's been used by lay folk in prison systems to connect. Basically, it's like a pseudo parole officer to help come alongside incarcerated people in California. The guy who made the app's a Christian, and he said, hey, could we do this to help provide early intervention in mental health issues through churches? So can we get a base of volunteers? Can we connect them through this app that's been proven in the market to work, and use that same app within churches? And they have, Jim and his team have built up a conglomerate, a team of folks that when the funder that we know looked at this big swing, there was a comfort level there, right? Because they knew, hey, there's a lot of folks invested in this. The app's been successful, and we can have confidence, and this is a bit de-risked for us. That group, has some things that are close to what y'all are talking about. I'd encourage you to get familiar with that. They're also doing a study that's examining pastors' attitudes, best practices, obstacles to providing mental health services through the churches on the lower than professional level. So a really exciting work going out of Regents University there.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Nathan. And we're going to turn to a time of question and answer and just say, Nathan, I'm so grateful for your presentation and also your perspective, because you're calling us to think about things not just from our perspective, but from our hearer's perspective, from the donor or potential donor. And I would imagine that a number of elements of your work are probably akin to marriage and family therapy. You're not just, translating information between the organization and the donor base, but sometimes, especially if families are involved, there's a lot of dynamics that are going on there. And so I'd just be curious if you could talk a little bit about both the privilege and also the burden that sometimes high net worth donors feel related to their giving. So what's that burden feel like for them? They want to give, but they want to give well.
I had an email last week. It becomes a job. And that's why I talk about kind of the baseline of relational giving and what goes above that. It can be hard for us on ministry side to hear that, but it becomes a job that your question was good, Thad. There's a lot that goes in there, but I think if ministries have the attitude of, hey, I'm asking this person to invest the money that God's chosen them to steward to my organization, what information do they need to know that they're doing what God called them to do and stewarding that money wisely? I would posit that there are unwise investments in Christian ministry. I think we've seen that. Happy to have that's probably a broader conversation than we need to have here. God is certainly responsible for the harvest, but there are higher and lower impact gifts that you can make, and being as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves requires some analytical thinking. And so giving them that is really a way to serve the donor. You're serving them by allowing them to be as wise as serpent and as innocent as doves.
That's wonderful. All right. So Michael Bischoff has put in the chat a question here, and he says, so how do you balance the tension between having big ideas, all caps, big ideas, and the realization that small organizations with a small budget might be a, all caps, big risk? So how do you balance that tension between big ideas and big risk?
Michael, my table mate. I think that the first thing is acknowledging it. I think that we try to paint rose-colored glasses and want to run away from risks. But a lot of my clients were entrepreneurs. They love risk. They get excited by risk. And so if you have a way of talking about yourself that acknowledges that, say, here's the risks. And by the way, we've worked to mitigate those risks. And this is how we're mitigating them in the best way we can. But what you're doing is a risk. This is venture capital. And acknowledging that, I think, can be a really healthy thing. Again, I think if you're winsome and can collaborate with people that can de-risk you a bit, that signals to donors that, hey, this isn't some fly-by-night group. That there's some serious people that are collaborating and are staking their reputation on this as well.
Yeah, that's right. And, from my perspective, I would say that typically, in terms of big time donors, foundations tend to be risk averse, usually because they have program officers that are responsible to showing return on investment to their board. But individuals, like what Nathan was saying, oftentimes, from a business perspective, yeah, this is an exciting opportunity. And so it's not that they are that they don't want risk. It's just that they don't want risk that doesn't have, some thoughtfulness behind it. And so I think having those two things together, I mean, one idea might be, Michael, for you and for others that are in those smaller organizations, to just say, okay, if someone were to come to you today and to say, I want to give you a $500,000 gift, how would you steward that effectively? What would that look like? And then what would be the plan? Have that in the back of your mind. And then you're able to share it, if ever presented with that type of opportunity. I think that proactiveness is part of what, Nathan, you were talking about earlier. And you also talked about the importance that trust plays, so you're helping to build and facilitate trust. So this transaction that's happening between donors and the organizations to which they're giving is really based upon a solid relationship that has trust. Now, I'd be curious, Nathan, if they've got these questions sometimes in the back of their head and they're not sharing them.
Yep.
That means that there's not a full kind of on trust relationship. And so, they might just kind of back out. So I'd be curious, you talked about how you can be proactive about anticipating what the donor might be questioning, but I'd be curious, are there ways to actually just kind of ask them, like, what concerns do you have about this model? Or what advice might you give us about, ways that we could improve our operations? So talk to us a little bit about that, about cultivating trust by actually inviting the donor to help us with our operations.
I'm from the South. We're based out of the South. Politeness is a big deal here. I don't know if you'll ever get, even asking, I don't know if you'll ever get those kind of hidden reservations. That's why I coach folks to be proactive, because it's hard to pull it out, with folks down here sometimes. Maybe some of the folks up there in the Northeast may have a bit easier time uncovering that. Proactive, I think, bringing people in and talking about your strategy and other strategies, not degrading other people, not talking down about other people, and probably not even listing other organizations that are doing what you're doing, but examining other strategies, knowing what's going on in your space, and being able to articulate the difference between that strategy and your strategy. And even just in conversation, say, I saw this other ministry, this is the strategy they're taking, this is what we're doing, and this is why. And that's a competitive advantage, is how folks make money. It's how business runs. So if you can, again, steal that business model thinking and say, hey, what is our competitive advantage? What is the strategy that we're taking, and why are we taking that? And if you can start talking that language, give people the why, right? We know that's a fun buzzword. Give people the why of why you're doing what you're doing proactively from a strategic level. That can prevent a lot of kind of these donor losses that you don't know what's happening.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And I'd be curious. So Wes Brown, he put in the chat, when you've developed a trusting relationship with major financial donors, they should be encouraged to give counsel as well. It is appreciated. And so, Wes, speak to that, because you've seen this, you've worked with high net worth donors in your professional career. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would say, in looking back over many years of working with fundraisers and theological education, one of the best annual sessions we ever had was with a panel of 3 very generous high net worth donors who had supported theological seminaries, and just having them tell us what they liked, what they responded positively to, what they preferred that one not do. And instead of having it on just one person and getting awkward and so forth, you had 3 individuals who are very accustomed to making generous gifts and who aren't always pleased with how they end up being used, just having the opportunity to address a group of professional fundraisers, and all of this in the Christian context. So I would say even in a small organization, you're likely to have some opportunities with friendship, say, of the president of your group or a key individual, to say, well, I'll bring in this person who has given our organization a lot of money, and I'll ask them for an additional gift. And that is the gift of their experience and their influence. I learned a long time ago that you do better with fundraising if you ask people for more than money. And then if you take them seriously with that, not that everybody's got good counsel, but a serious exchange can be deeply appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's so wise, Wes, what you're asking us to think about, because, even to invite a major donor to your organization, say, look, I'm going to be talking to other folks that I hope will give at the same capacity that you're giving or even higher. And I'm not coming from a business background. I heard this guy, Nathan, he said that I need to be thinking like, an investment. My organization's an investment for a donor. Can you help me to think through that? What are the questions that donors are thinking about? Or, there's a variety of ways that you can call upon them to help them with that. And then also, Nathan, so just talk to us a little bit about your approach. So you primarily serve high net worth clients. I mean, as you said, you've got 10 to 15 clients that you work with at any time, $150 million in giving or so annually. For the organizations that are on this call, where would you point them as kind of some next steps and things like that, knowing that Calvin Edwards' company is primarily interested in serving the donor side? What are some of the resources that you've seen throughout your career that might be helpful as next steps for some of the folks that are here on this call?
I think what Wes said is right. Talk to your business-minded top donors and ask them, how can I effectively communicate to you? How can I answer your questions? What questions would your friends have? There's lots of fundraising shops out there, and some of whom can be helpful and help do this translation. And Wes was talking about translation. You're asking a panel of 3 donors, how can we speak to you effectively, right? And we know what we do. We're in it every day, but how can we communicate that to you? Digging in to the translation of what we're doing. The other thing is, I would just say, I can't make a statistical argument for this, but on a sample basis, a skewed sample, maybe not representative sample, the organizations that have as part of their strategic plan an uncompromising commitment to measurement and evaluation of what they're doing. They may not see the ROI of that commitment in year 1 or year 2, but when they start stacking those results and they can clearly communicate the methodology by which they're gathering those results, and they can pair that with the stories they've had, that's jet fuel. It's just jet fuel. So I would just encourage everyone here, if you can convince your board and convince your senior executive, hey, we need to slow down and count and measure, because we're asking people to make stewardship investments. My lights have gone out. We're asking people to make stewardship investments. We need to serve them with information along with our stories, and we're trusting God that will pay dividends over the years. Maybe that looks like going retroactively back to your historical services. Maybe that's, hey, we just got to start now. But intentional measurement and counting, I think can really benefit down the road.
That's wonderful. All right. So let me just kind of summarize here for everybody's benefit. So we talked about a number of things today. One is the importance of relationships that are critical for the art and the ministry of fundraising. So you need to continue to invest in relationships. And most fundraising is still done that way. But when business savvy people are thinking about your ministry, you need to talk with them like you're an investment. So how would they invest in your ministry? And what might God kind of produce as an output or a return for that investment? There are some things that you want to avoid. And so many nonprofits, they can't clearly express what it is that they are doing with in the concept of shared language. And I'll give you a quick example of what Nathan was talking about. So when I was serving in pastoral ministry, I never will forget the senior pastor that I was working under one time. He had an altar call, which was a little bit unusual for our church. And he said, if anybody here would like to come forward and profess Christ, please do so now. And I looked at him and I thought, I don't know that anybody here actually knows what that means. So when you're thinking about your ministry, try to articulate it using common and very crisp, clear language. Don't fall into the trap of just using the latest buzzword. And ultimately, you need to have big ideas that would justify large-scale investments. If you can do that and have that trusting relationship with your donors, then God's going to do some amazing things through your ministry. So that's just a quick summation of the things we talked about today. I hope you've enjoyed our time together.